Thank you, and welcome everybody to this week's episode of the RevOps Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Henderson, and I'm joined today by Jonathan and Brandon. If you guys want to do a quick intro.
Hey guys. I am the other host of the podcast, Brandon Revinger.
You're not the other host. You're not the other host.
I am too.
I'm the other host of the podcast. The assistant to the assistant regional manager.
Exactly.
I will say we recorded, Brandon and I recorded an episode. Sorry, Jonathan, we totally excluded you from it. We recorded an episode with Chrissy Saunders of CS2 Marketing. Mm-hmm. For their podcast. It was Brandon and I and Chrissy, and she properly introduced us as me being the host and Brandon being the co-host or guest, I believe.
No, she completely left me out. She was just like, Jordan's the host.
She totally screwed you on it.
Yeah. And then Brandon.
It was my favorite thing. I was like,
yeah, exactly.
Brandon's some afterthought.
Like, Jordan's the host and like Brandon's here too. So like
that's how we should introduce him from now on. Just like,
guys, I'm joined today by Jonathan and also I guess Brandon's here too.
That one guy. That other guy.
Yeah. Anyways, today we're going to talk about something that's kind of fun. We've the past we've talked a lot about all the metrics you should use, all the different pieces of the revenue operation you should be looking at, the data you should use to analyze them, how you should fix problems, doing a lot of that stuff. We've had a lot of guests. We're going to be segueing into, I think, a stretch here where we have a lot more guests and do more sort of like case study specific examples of revenue operations in the wild doing its thing.
People like guests.
Yeah, guests will be good. We got some guests lined up. I'm working on it.
We got some good ones. We got some good ones coming up.
We do have some good ones coming up. But we talk a lot about this stuff. One thing we've never really touched on, and interesting enough, I gave a presentation on this probably 5 or 6 months ago, and it was easily the most well-attended presentation I've given. And now the ebook coming out of that is the most popular ebook downloaded for like a quarter from us. So sort of fascinating topic that would, I think, be super helpful to everybody is evaluating sales technology, or just evaluating technology in general, right? How do we evaluate technology? And it's a dense topic because there's, what are they, like 15,000 marketing software technologies, like 5,000 sales software technologies. CS is lagging. Anybody out there, you want to make a technology, make it for CS. I mean,
more opportunity there. Yeah,
let's support our fellow compatriots in CS a little bit with some software.
Yeah, they have like 5 tools compared to marketing's like 50,000.
Yeah, right. And I want to, by the way, clarify before we sort of dive into this is that when we're talking about evaluating like the technology, we're talking about evaluating software as a service technologies. I'm not actually talking about anything else than that because I think this is a very important nuance. When if we evaluate something that's not software as a service, actually just a software you're buying and you own in perpetuity, it's a totally different evaluation cycle than what you're looking at when you're looking at software as a service. And there's some reasons for that. One of them being software as a service, long-term, probably a lot more expensive for your business. But just want to clarify before we sort of dive into that. This is SaaS specific, and I wanted to use software as a service.
Dare I say sassy?
Sassy.
Aw.
There was no amount of pause that was going to make that joke. It just wasn't. So that's when you're doing stand up and you're like, come on guys, that was a good joke. You say it. You have to, it's the audience's fault. It's their fault. They're not laughing at that. It's not. That was a bad joke. Anyways, so where do you start? So I want to hear from you guys. Say you're like, where do you start when you're evaluating technology?
Start with what you need. Figure out your business needs.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. That is the biggest thing. Is like, why are we even evaluating this technology? And I think we might have mentioned it in the past, but I think there are a lot of instances where someone from the executive team goes, we need to be doing this one thing, or we should have this technology, and then everyone's like, okay, let's go buy something. It's like, do we really even need this in the first place? What's the business problem that this is solving? And be crystal clear on that first before actually even doing any sort of trials or any sort of evaluation at all, right? Like, do we need this?
Brandon, I totally agree. Like, I think the first question you have to ask is, do we actually need a software product to solve this problem, right? Because I think too often, and Jonathan Stevens will disagree with me because he believes you should have a software product
for everything.
for every problem.
This is actually an intervention episode for Jonathan. That's what this is.
I have a legitimate, it is minorly, I have a legitimate list of tools Jonathan has requested, and it grows constantly.
I was talking with her.
6 in the last 4 months.
Yeah.
6 products in the last 4 months. He's like, we really need this. This is the biggest problem we face today. And then he sends me a product, and it's a new product every time.
I was talking with our CMO the other day, William, and I was like, William, I actually really like this software, and he's like, yeah, Jonathan already pitched it to me. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not surprised.
but like that's the biggest thing, right? Is do we actually need this? Is this both from a can we solve this without a software product, which often the answer is yes, and the other piece of it is do we need this to the extent that it is fundamental to our business right now? Because priorities being what they are, you always have to ask yourself the question, like, yeah, this is great. It's a problem we could solve with buying this product. That's wonderful. But do we have the time, bandwidth, resources to do it? Is the problem that glaring that we actually need to do it right now? Or could we allocate those resources to something else in the short term that's more important and have a bigger impact, across our business and avoid buying that product? Totally where I would start.
It's not always need, though. Sometimes I will say, sometimes it might just be something that we want to try, because and I get it.
You like to play with tools. I know. Pro tip, if you have Jonathan, you have to have me on staff to avoid your company buying 46 software products.
So specific around, I think, like lead generation and things along those lines, that's where I would say try new things is more of a solve than it would be like on a business case, where then you would just kind of look for the needs. But I mean, obviously need is priority number one, but don't be afraid to try a new product to see if that'll drive more dollars in the door, because you may not need it, but it could augment your lead generation process.
I know you're talking about Grojo right now, I'm pretty sure. Because you
Outgrow. Grojo. That's a different one.
It's a fair point, right? But like even then, I would argue you're still solving a business problem because you're not considering other sources to generate leads unless you have a business problem if you're not generating enough leads.
True. Yeah.
Right. And in that scenario, you are getting a problem because you're getting a software because you're reasonably certain that software will help you solve that problem, or at least you're certain enough to want to try it for a period of time. Mm-hmm. And so I still think you're still going back to a business problem. So, all right. So you start there. You've identified, you've got a problem, and the only way to solve it for real is going out, getting yourself some software.
The best
super
day
important.
ever.
Right. There's two camps of ops folks. There's ops folks that just hate buying new softwares because they're like, I just don't want to spend 2 months implementing something. And then there's ones that just can't wait to geek out with headphones on for 8 hours a day for 2 months over some product they purchased. Jonathan and I are firmly in opposite camps on that product.
We keep each other balanced.
Yeah, I mean,
checks and balances. That's what it's all about. Yeah,
kind of. I just ignore it. But okay, cool. So you've decided that. So then for me, the next step, and you guys tell me if you have a step in between, but it is actually setting out basic business requirements from there, right? Because I'm not going to actually start evaluating anything until I have that together. What are the most important business requirements for you guys?
So top of mind, obviously we just talked about why do we need this? What is this solving? What? Yeah,
clearly define the problem.
Mm-hmm. Defining what software this could potentially replace. You've got to outline the dollar amount. Can you attribute a dollar amount to the amount of time saved on your team? Can you attribute a dollar amount to the amount of ROI that it could bring onto the table? All those things you want to evaluate in that process.
Totally. Brandon, what would you add on there?
Right. So there's like tech requirements, right? Yeah. But there's I think there's also, I don't know what you would call it, but like soft skill or like softer pieces that like you really can't measure, like your team's time to implement this stuff, or time to actual value, or time to train your team on it, right? Because enterprise software, there's one buyer and then there's hundreds of users of the product itself, and actually time to manage the change going off of a if you're coming off of a different product and onto a new product, right? There's so much that's involved. A lot of people are like, yeah, we're just going to buy it and then we're going to start using it. And it never ends up like that, right? It's always a lot more work for the integration. It's a lot more work for onboarding. It's a lot more work for actually getting people to use it than you think in the first place. And, people are resistant to change. They like what's familiar and what's comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And some of that I would probably put more in like the next step of the process for me, which is actually evaluating the software. Mm-hmm. And some of it is like right? You should have some level of predetermined, like, here's what we're comfortable dedicating from a timeline of implementation standpoint. Here's what we're comfortable dedicating these. You should have some level of agreement going into that. That way, when you're evaluating tech, you can say like right up front, cool, like you guys say this implementation is going to take 2 months. We're only comfortable doing 30 days. Like, is that possible or not possible with your software? Right. For me, though, some of the things that I would circle back on, because I would want agreement on this stuff before I actually start evaluating, is budget and resources, for one. If I'm aligned across the company that this is a problem we need to go solve with software, we should be able to align on some version of a budget. And it's probably a ballpark range. And when I say by budget, I don't mean just money. I actually mean things like invoice schedule, contract terms. I want to have agreement on that up front. Like, hey, finance team, if I go buy a product, does it have to be quarterly invoicing? Because if it is, I want to know that up front, because that's going to come into play in the negotiations, and that's important. Are we comfortable doing a 2-year term with a product that we really like? If not, that also comes into play, right? Align on those things. Timeline, Brandon, you touched on timeline, super important. Not just how do we put like what's A to B, but when do we actually want to put this thing on? Yeah. When do we want to turn the ignition on this baby?
And what resources are you allocating to turning it on and keeping it on and keeping it maintained?
Right. And are we agreed that if we need 2 months of ops time to do nothing but this, that's what ops is going to do for 2 months? Because we need to align that that's the case, which is often not the case, but something that I would get buy-in on at the start. Integration levels. Like, I would actually align on that going into evaluating. I would talk to the company internally and say, hey, when I think of integrations, there's, no integration at all. There's unilateral integration, so it pushes data into your CRM. There's bilateral, so it can sync and it's pushing data back from one another. And then there's sort of native integration, right, where it's built in there. Align on which ones are important to you, right? Mm-hmm. So there's certain instances where unilateral might be totally fine. There's a lot of instances where integration by native or platform by built within is always best. And so if it's a key functionality you want to keep for a long time, have that agreed upon at the start, because that'll help you make your short list pretty rapidly.
Yeah, don't start your business proposal until you've ironed out those details.
Oh yeah, totally right, 1,000%. Don't even go sign up for demos on websites until you've decided what you're going to look for on that, because you can find that stuff out without even having a discovery call with the sales rep.
Yep.
And then features and functionality. I think that's start to make a list of what are the key features we're 100% sure we absolutely need as a part of this process. That's going to be pretty flexible, to be honest. Like, there's going to be features and functionality that you're just not aware of that you're going to find out is super important to you. But make a short list, make a thing.
Yeah, and I think on that point is what are those things that we absolutely need, and then what are the kind of nice to haves?
Yeah.
Because
rate them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you can actually compare that to your current solution, or maybe you're evaluating a few at a time, right? You're actually kind of looking at them side by side. This one feature or this one product does this feature really well, but this other one is complete crap. Or our current vendor actually does this just fine. But you have to list all those out and then start to compare those. And actually, makes me think one thing that we didn't talk about is probably a few steps ago is did someone else in your organization already buy this or have a solution for it, right?
That's a good point.
Solid point. Go ask that question. Or ask if you have something similar, right?
Exactly.
That can maybe do the trick, because that's a very big point, especially big orgs. There's probably a lot of that going on.
There's so much of that, exactly. CS already bought something. The sales team had zero clue, right? So they just bought.
Doesn't get budget to buy tools.
No, you're right. Sorry, CS.
And on the converse of that, if it's a tool you really want, you can kind of circulate around the company and figure out what other departments might find uses out of this tool. So it might be a harder sell if you're just trying to get it for the marketing department, but all of a sudden you find out sales, CS, support all need something similar or some type of functionality that it does. That's a lot easier to bring into the company.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the key things that I would touch on here is as we're looking at this, what other teams could potentially use it to solve other problems, right? I don't want to buy in tech to solve a problem for one team very often. I want to buy tech that's going to solve a lot of problems across my entire organization. Like that's fundamental to me, especially in buying SaaS, because I'm going to pay you in perpetuity for this product. I don't own it. I'm renting it. And therefore I need to justify the cost as broadly as I can. Which is super important. And that goes back to the features and functionality. What can it actually do for other teams as well? Yeah.
PM tools like Asana are a perfect example of that. If you just stand up that for your own department and don't try to include other departments, you're just as siloed as you were before. So
totally. Even like conversation intelligence software, right? Like most people evaluate it as, what's the functionality for the sales team for sales coaching? And that's great. That's the problem it solves most of the time. That's its core function. But are you using it to solve your ability to, coordinate with marketing? Does marketing have access to it? Can they listen to annotated phone calls? Can they go get information out of it to find out, what messaging is working on calls? They can adapt that into theirs. Like, can CS use it to go back and listen to implementation calls to make sure they were good and what was of key concern, so they can do that? They can go listen to discovery calls. Like, it can solve problems across your organization. Think of it that way, right? Super important. All right, so you've decided you've got a big problem. You've decided software is the only way to solve it. You've agreed on a budget. You've got a timeline in place. You know your integration requirements. You have a feature list and all set up, and some potential nice to have, some great to haves. It's time to actually evaluate some software, right? You've done this. This is taking you 3 weeks. And now you get to do Jonathan's favorite part, which is schedule 46 demos for a 3-week sprint. And you're going to do nothing but see sales tech. And by the way, Jonathan, I think you like this because you schedule the demos and you like the tool, and then you loop me in. And if we decide not to buy it, I'm on the hook to tell them no.
yeah, exactly. Jordan's the bad guy.
You never have to be the bad guy.
I love it.
But I always have to be the bad guy.
Bad cop, good cop. It's what works.
Yeah, but this is why I hate it. It's always me saying, it's cool, but no thanks.
Yeah, Jordan hates us, so he doesn't want us to get tools.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, basically what happens. But that goes to my first point. When you go to evaluate software, don't overinvest in the initial round of discovery and demo. And sales reps you're working with are going to push you for this. They're going to ask, hey, great, we got that discovery call set up. Can we get XYZ, head of sales ops, head of revenue, head of sales, head of marketing on that first call? We want to make sure we have all the right people. They're always going to ask, and they're just doing their job. That's wonderful. Of course, our sales reps ask to get the right people on too. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of money, right? Pick a tiger team. Pick one ops person, one key stakeholder, and have them go out and evaluate that first round. And maybe it's if it's a more sales oriented problem, maybe it's a director of sales and Jonathan are going to go evaluate 10 tools and figure out which 3 are their top list to shortlist for the rest of us. Because otherwise, I'm spending a lot of money as a business, investing 10 people on all these calls, which is crazy. That's where I would start. And then what other key tips do you guys have in evaluating?
I'd say one of the biggest is don't get tunnel vision. Don't see a product and then all of a sudden think that's the product for me. I'm not going to go look at any of their competitors. That happens so often in tech where you see something and you can't unsee it and that's all you see and you buy it. And then all of a sudden 6 months later, you're like, this tool is a little cheaper and it does a little more for me. So don't be that guy.
Or gal. Other point to add to that is don't see a crap product and then see one that's decent and think it's the greatest thing. Because that often happens too. You see something, you're like, what are you guys doing? And then you see one that's like middle of the pack and you're like, this is the end-all, be-all greatest tool that ever existed because compared to the other one. Again, it's not apples to apples comparison. You're looking at a broader group as a whole.
Yeah.
Right? So
sometimes you have to think like that though, because if you're not an enterprise shop, you're not going to be able to afford some of these huge high dollar products. So sometimes you do kind of have to live with a little lesser than what you would hope you'd get. Otherwise.
Right. It goes back to budget.
Yeah.
It goes back to budget, right? Which is why you would align on that before you get into that. But let's do this. So you've decided how you're going to evaluate them. You've got all the demos set up. You're taking demos, aside from features, which is obviously, the core thing you're evaluating. And budget. Let's just disregard that. What are like key considerations you would have when evaluating software?
Yeah, I think you definitely want, when you're ready, when you've got a handful of finalists, maybe 2 or 3, get your top 2 or 3 going, get an RFP out there, make sure you're covering your bases on the IT security side. If you've got a stringent IT security department, that's always a big one, especially in like financial services, insurance, healthcare. Those ones are very important to make sure you get sign off from your IT department. That would be a huge one. Just get RFPs out there, get your important questions answered.
People are going to hate you for saying RFP. I just want to point that out.
I know myself, I'm like, I hate it when people are like, can you get
it? Sucks. Yeah, exactly. It absolutely sucks. It's more on the enterprise side. Like on the SMB side, we rarely deal with RFPs. So if you're at an enterprise company, you probably hear about it all the time. On the SMB space, you probably don't hear about RFPs too often. So don't send an RFP unless you really have to, is what I'm trying to say.
Good course correction.
But, I mean, you can kind of get your RFP done with an email. You don't have to make it super formal and 200 questions on an Excel doc. You can just get a few questions answered in email. That could kind of work as an RFP process.
Totally. Brandon, what else?
I mean, one thing that comes to mind immediately is like integrations, right? Like, does this actually integrate with all of my systems, or is it going to be a black box? Like, that's the last thing that I want. And I know it's something that all RevOps people like think about all the time is how can I actually get the data that I need from that system into the system that everyone uses, Salesforce, right? So that now I can report on it. Everyone else has clear visibility into it. And I would really do a deep dive on the actual integrations, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And then I think about other things too, like what's the level of support that you're going to get, or how
important.
That's a big
right. Like how easy is it going to be to trouble-shoot if something arises,
or what's their knowledge base look like?
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Or do I have to like get in touch with the CSM and schedule a call for next week, and then we dive in and figure it out? Well,
do I get a CSM?
That's a good point.
Right? Is it just me, or when companies offer chat support, I just feel so much warmer.
Kill me.
That means you're not paying enough money to actually have a dedicated CSM.
Well, yeah, it depends on what you're buying. But I mean, like, HubSpot does a fantastic job with their support. And any time of day, you just ping them and they're right there helping you out. It is a wonderful support team.
Yeah. And I hate the, I want a dedicated person, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want to email support at your URL. It just kills me internally. What I do when it happens is I send that email and then I bitch about you for 20 minutes, which is not great for you long term. Which would go back to piling on to what Brandon's talking about. When I think about like integration level and some of those sort of things, longevity for me is super, super important. And I think about, is it integrating into the tools? Because if it's not, it still might solve my problem, but I'm going to move off it in a year. Mm-hmm. Like the longevity of our relationship is going to be short, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And product roadmap. Like if your product roadmap doesn't align to what I'm going to need in the next 3 to 5 years, also not a good win for me, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's hugely important.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that I had. Like, will this product grow with my company, right? As I grow.
Yeah.
And the best support reps I've ever had are ones that actually take an active interest in what we're trying to do. They're bringing ideas to the table. They're taking what other customers have done successfully and saying, hey, we should probably try this because my other customer did really well with this. So
are they a trusted expert?
Mm-hmm.
To pile onto the support knowledge base, that sort of piece, usability, super important. Mm-hmm. I can offset some bad support if the usability is fantastic. That's very true, right? Mm-hmm. If this is a user-friendly product that I can be ramped on in an hour, I don't really care about your support team that much anymore. Like that's fine. If it's simple. Any other ones you guys want to add on?
Maybe last point.
I have one really good one. You guys are just totally missing it. I'm super disappointed.
My guess would be managing it, right?
Yes, yeah. We opened the outline and saw that said that.
Yeah, exactly.
Say more words.
Yeah, so I like how easy is it going to be to actually maintain this thing? Like, is it going to be one person's job every week to go in and whatever it is, like tinker with the system or make sure people are using it or do the training? Like, or is it going to be something that relatively you can kind of set it and forget it? Maybe you're revisiting it once a month or whatever, right? It's just like, how easy is it to actually manage this entire platform or software?
It's such an important piece when you start to think of it from an overall budget perspective, because if I ask you, like, what's the overall time requirements on a weekly basis to manage this tech, and you say 15 minutes or you say 5 hours, one of those costs me as a business an extra $50,000 a year. Right?
Yeah.
Because 5 hours of ops time a week is an expensive amount of time, is what it is. And it's costing me more than that business-wise, because that time could be used to fix other problems and solve other things instead. So it's actually slowing my business growth. And so it's not just the salary cost, it's just the overall impact on the business is too much. It's just too much. So hugely important. Jonathan, you're just nodding. You can't just nod.
I said yeah.
You were gonna say something. I said yeah. All right. Any other last thoughts on that before I slide in to the next thing?
I think we nailed it.
All right. That was a lot.
Yeah,
so, it's a lot of boxes to check if I'm going to buy some software. Jonathan knows this.
Yeah.
I say no. It's 150 times out of 151. So, if anybody listening, if you're prospecting me, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Like, I see tools and like, it's super cool, but like, no.
That's too much work. I don't want to pitch Jordan on our product anymore. You know?
Yeah. I wouldn't. I'm a firm gatekeeper. It's not great. Yeah, and then Jonathan pitches me, and I go, no. All right, so you've got a short list. So now we've gone through this whole process, right? You decided you had a problem, you needed software to fix it, you set up your business requirements, you did that first round of reviews, you got all the way through those 10, you picked 2 or 3, and you're ready to go on deciding which of these 2 or 3, and you probably have a presumptive favorite, but what other things would you do at this level to say, hey, this is the one of these 3 that we're going to go to?
So I think you'd want to start with a pro and con analysis, and depending on the tool and who's using the tool, you'd probably want to include at least anybody who's seeing the demo and has any say in whether or not you're getting the tool to evaluate your finalists and kind of evaluate which one's their favorite and why, which function, make sure everybody's checking the boxes as far as what you're interested in as far as feature sets. And then you can kind of score each product, and then that'll help you kind of guide your decision and also create alignment amongst the team, because you don't want to pick a tool just because you like it, but the rest of your team liked another tool. That's just going to create a ton of friction within your department.
Totally fair. Brandon?
Yeah, no, I do think just making sure everything, like you have all of your, you've mapped all your initiatives and mapped all your business problems and outcomes to the actual, the tool that you're evaluating, right? It's like, okay, we came up with this list weeks ago or whatever. Now we saw the demo. Now let's actually revisit that list and just make sure that those use cases are actually and those business drivers. Exactly. It's like I think so many people just get enamored with just like they showed me a dashboard that, and it was really cool and sexy, and I guess it kind of checks one box, or they don't even dive into like, okay, how easy was it to set up that dashboard, right? Of course it's going to look beautiful in a demo, but then you actually buy the product and it's like, oh, I have to wait 6 months before I get enough data to actually, give me any insights on how this dashboard is helping us perform,
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's looking at, does it actually solve, like going back to step 1 and saying, here was what we set out to solve. How well are we solving it?
Is it actually solving? Exactly.
Super important here. And then, by the way, this is a great place to say, what other problems can we solve with it? Because you've been looking at that through the whole process. Now you've got your short list of 3. Now break it out. Okay, we solved that problem. This one also solves 4 other problems. This one solves 2 other problems. This one solves 1 other problem. Like, you got a pretty good indicator of which one you want to go with then, right? Like, it's a great way to think about it. Go back to literally the start and revisit that place.
Absolutely. And then I think the fun part comes when you've got your 2 finalists ready and you can start pitting them against each other when negotiations start. I love that part.
So there's a thing here, by the way, that is actually important to note, because it gets me every time, and I don't think people think about it, is comparing price to value is super important, right? So if you go back and you say, hey, this one solves 5 problems, this one solves 2, but this one's half the price, super important to look at that because of your budget, right? The other thing here that I think people miss is oftentimes people will buy a product and they'll be like, well, we bought 30 seats, but they gave us buy one, get one free. So, it's 50% off that first year. Year 2, you're paying full price and you're buying this for 7 years, right? Like, you're not like, don't evaluate just the price they gave you in first year. It's software as a service. It's an ongoing expense. And if they gave you a 50% discount, the price is doubling next year. If they gave you a 10% discount and it's the same price, the price is not doubling next year. That will be the cheaper product next year by a significant margin, which are things that are very important to think about.
And especially if it's a product like a marketing automation platform or an intent data product, getting in and out of those products is a very difficult process as far as implementation.
Totally.
So,
right, which is why they do that 50% discount. We're going to get you in, get you on it, and you are not going to leave.
You can't leave.
You're stuck.
It's a brilliant pricing model, and most people don't think about it, but it's super important because that your software costs will overinflate in year 2, year 3 of contracts otherwise, which is super problematic for your ability to buy additional software products in the future, which is tough. Then past that, for me, things like legal, security, privacy, data integrity, that sort of stuff that Jonathan already touched on is super important, right?
Terms of service, that's a big one.
Yeah, terms of service, like actually getting through all that stuff and making sure that they're going to work with you on it and line it up to you. If you're a SOC 2 org and you're buying something that's going to be, a data processor, you want to make sure they're SOC 2, that sort of stuff.
GDPR, CCPA, big ones.
Yeah, super, super important that you have the infrastructure there to support. One thing that I do here, by the way, and I'll tell you guys this, everybody listen, they'll probably think I'm the world's biggest asshole. So say Jonathan comes to me and he's evaluated this whole process, he's gotten here and he's like, here's my top 3. I will pick the cheapest one every time and tell Jonathan, I think we'll go with this one, even if it's his third pick. And if he pushes back really hard, I was just seeing how hard he would push back. Because if I say it and he goes, oh yeah, that's great, that'll be fine. Like, cool. Like, there wasn't that much of a difference between them. I'll use the cheaper one. Like, right? Like that's the reality. But if Jonathan comes back and goes, oh no, like that one, it won't do the things we need to do. Like that's you're making the wrong choice. Cool. Perfect. You feel passionate about that. You think this is the best tool. Like, I just want to test that that's real and you're not just being chased by a shiny object, essentially, because that happens, right? And it's a good way to do that, because shiny object syndrome, you won't argue with me if you're just fascinated by a shiny object, but you will argue with me if you really think it's the best tool for the problem.
I think it keeps that person honest too, like, because you get excited, you get motivated by a new tech, and then if somebody asks you those pointed questions, like, you're going to answer them honestly, and then those honest answers can kind of like bring out the truth in you and get you out of those rosy colored blinders that you got on. Right. And I, how many times have I messaged you when we've done this process, or you said that and I said, cool, type it up in a document and send it to me. And then you either do or you don't. And when you don't, I think, it's not that important. Yeah.
It must not have been, like, the difference must not have, there have been times where you did type up like a 2-page thing and sent it over. I'm like, all right, like, he really truly believes in this. And that makes a big difference, right? For me, at least, that's like, I actually want to buy in. So everybody that's the gatekeeper, I highly recommend that. Jonathan, now you know that.
I'm going to use that to my advantage.
I probably never should have told you. But
Yeah, exactly.
I think you were going to figure it out eventually. Anyway.
I had an idea.
I've been doing it to you for 2 years, so if not, we got problems. Anything else you guys want to add on to this?
I don't think so.
Cool.
Maybe one more thing. Here I go with maybe one more thing again. Like, if so this goes back to like pricing. Now we're talking about the other side of it, right? It's like, how can I get discounts?
Oh, that's true.
Right. So I don't know, was it last episode or a few episodes ago, we talked about actually the other side being the seller and not offering discounts. But I think we all know that software these days, like, it just kind of comes with the territory, right? Like, I kind of expect a discount these days, but there are things that you can do to get a discount, like offer your team doing a case study, offer your team doing G2 reviews, things like that, or you can negotiate other terms, like this is what it's going to be the second year too. Like a lot of people just negotiate the first year of their contract and they don't think about the second year. And the second year, I mean, we just talked about that. Like the second year is what really gets you, right? Yeah. So it's, don't forget about trying to negotiate some discounts in there.
There's a handy thing that very few people do when it comes to year 2, year 3, year 4. I'm going to piss off a ton of software companies
Salesforce.
Today. You can ask, because every one of these agreements has an auto renew clause, right?
Yeah,
every one of them does. You can ask to add on to the auto renew clause that they're capped in their ability to raise your price in subsequent contracts based on no more than 3 to 5%, or even tie it to the consumer price index, which is a very easy one for companies to tie to. You can increase no more than the annual CPI increase, right? Which is usually around 3 to 5%. And you can ask for that, and they will typically always do it. And I would tell you this, that if you get a 10% discount with a no more than a 3% increase in price year over year in perpetuity, that's a better contract than a 15% discount with no cap on increases. Because that 15% contract is going to be expensive in year 2, and the other one is not going to raise that much year over year. And so it's a really easy thing to do, and companies will typically agree to it. I've actually very rarely ever had a company say no to that, just because they're trying to close the business, right? And so I would ask for it all the time. Now, the times you'll get them to say no is when they give you that 50% discount, and then you have a pretty clear indicator what their plans are for year 2.
Yeah.
if they're saying no, oof.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Just that, like, if you're signing a multi-year contract, what are those terms, right? Like, there have been times where we signed the contract, and then the renewal comes up, and it's written in that's a 10% increase in price automatically, and we're like, what the F?
Yep.
You bastards.
Important things to review.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whoever's running your deal desk internally for your business, have them review this contract. You know?
There you go.
It's fair. All right, so I'm going to move us forward.
The final thing I think we did not mention in this process, the social proof aspect. If you, especially on somebody who's, 20, 30K plus product, you want to make sure you're covering your bases. So ask them if they've got a reference that you can talk to, or go out and try to find a reference and make sure you're covering your bases that way. It's not always going to happen, but it's a good thing when it does.
I support the latter and not the former, for what it's worth. Asking for references, like, they're just going to connect you with the 2 people who are the happiest.
Yeah. Or they're giving the best discount too.
Right. Yeah. But I do support, and I've done this. Go look at their customer list online, and they'll have some, here's our the 30 customers or whatever. Go find somebody at those companies who's actually using that product. Message them on LinkedIn and ask them for a reference. Like that's really easy to do, and you're not going to get the one that they're like, yeah, this person's the happiest, let's send them over, because otherwise you're just wasting time. Really valid point.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Like, honestly, I've got a decent network, so I always go out and I ask people in my network. Or if you're part of something like Revenue or Pavilion, right? Like, there's a channel dedicated just to technology and buying technology. People like Jonathan love that channel and geek out about that stuff.
Kill me.
Yes.
Absolutely.
A channel full of Jonathans.
It's a wonderful world.
I think it's just marketing ops in general. They've had too much tech for too long, so they're just used to buying technology. Yeah. Everybody else who came from sales ops or CS ops is like, we did this on spreadsheets 4 years ago.
Exactly. I'm just happy to have something.
Yeah. We've got tools. We've got 3 or 4 of them. Great. That's awesome. We're set. All right, I'm segueing us. This week on LinkedIn, I've got this question actually quite a few times, and we had a whole whiskey happy hour about it yesterday, by the way. Awesome whiskey happy hour. That was great. This week on LinkedIn. So what key metrics do you track when it comes to conversation intelligence? By the way, I actually got this message after that, and I was minorly upset because I almost didn't use it, because they said, what key metrics do you track when it comes to conversation intelligence to make sure you're getting the most out of tools like Gong and Quora?
Gross.
And I was like, how are you gonna message me after our whiskey happy hour?
What is this?
Asking me about 2 competitors.
What is this, 2005? You're using Gong still? Come on, guys.
Yeah, I know, come on. Yeah, get out of here. What are you doing? Also, you're on our whiskey happy hour. You see my title. You're messaging me on LinkedIn. You know we have conversation. What are you doing?
Come on, man.
So I almost didn't use it. Ours is better, by the way, for everybody listening. So use ours, obviously. Ours is literally called conversation intelligence. He used the phrase. Anyways, I digress. The question still stands. What key metrics do you track when it comes to conversation intelligence to make sure you're getting the best out of the tool? And I can start on this one, or you guys can start, whatever you want.
I was just say, I think there are two aspects of this, right? So there's really two big like people who benefit from this. There's the reps, and then there's the coaches and the managers, right? There's the management. So I'll start off with saying management should really be like, you should be tracking how many calls are reviewed, how many calls do get annotated, stuff like that, right? How
100%.
many, right? I think that's a very, very overlooked one.
I think it's the most important one.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
I absolutely would argue that.
Why do you buy these tools? Exactly. You know?
Like if you're buying these tools to try to create a culture of coaching.
Yep.
That's the reality, right? Like
Scale
you want a
coaching.
culture, right? And if you're not setting KPIs for your managers to coach a certain number of times, listen to a certain number of calls, annotate a certain number of things, you're not going to create a culture of coaching.
Yep.
That's just the reality of that scenario, because time is a hard thing. How much time can I dedicate to this? Like, you can dedicate a lot more if it's in your KPIs, I promise.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if we're tracking for it and celebrating when people hit those KPIs and coach really well, like that's going to create the culture. That's the most important thing. Anyways, so totally agree with that one. What's next?
I think how much is the rep talking? How much are they talking? Too much? Too little? Just right?
I know I fail this one all the time.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, they're pacing. Those are things, very important things to analyze, because that can give you a lot of insight into why they're doing something right or wrong.
Yeah, like number of monologues is a super powerful one. Number of monologues by the person they're talking to, super powerful. Just overall, like rep etiquette on the phone. Mm-hmm. I think you talk about like tone, pace, monologuing, interruptions, filler words, open-ended questions. Those things would all fall into that sort of like etiquette bucket. Yep. And I think all of that is, sort of wildly important when you start to look at this.
Yeah, understanding where they're stumbling, where they're having troubles. That's a big one to point out. If they're saying a lot in a certain section, drill into why. Yeah,
I had a rep that was using "got it" all the time. So you'd say something, and they'd say "got it," and then the person would stop talking. And because "got it" ends the
that's not a good one,
right? Like, I understand. It says I understand. Stop talking. Let's move on. Whereas oh, okay, like proceed, right? Mm-hmm. Like you want the other person to keep talking. "Got it" ends you, and so like things like that, like identifying that, because that's the keyword showing up the most, because you're measuring etiquette and watching those things, changes how that rep's day-to-day looks. Mm-hmm. Like now that person can book more meetings and have more result just from one simple tweak, because you're watching etiquette. So it's super powerful.
Yeah. And are you asking questions that get no's is kind of along those lines. You don't want to ask questions to hear no, especially when yes, or just yes. Yeah. Like
you want open-ended questions, right? Yeah. But no, I totally agree. But I would go back to, if I had to respond to this, and I'm going to send him a response that's going to be cheeky because it's a Gong and Court. So I would say I don't think there's a way to get the most out of tools like Gong and Court.
Truth.
Anyways, this is the most annoyed I was at a LinkedIn message. Anyways, my number one thing would still be what Brandon said, which is the creating a culture of coaching by tracking the manager side of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. So, anything else you want to add, Brandon?
Well, when it comes to the conversation etiquette metrics, I think it's really important to note that like one size does not fit all. We know here that talk rate can vary depending on your role, also depending on geo. So, for example, our best performing SDRs talk faster. Our best performing AEs actually talk slower. They're doing a different job, right? Mm-hmm. So it really depends. You can't like read a Gong report and say, you have to talk at this speed. Now everyone talks at that speed, when that could be very particular to just one role or one person or one geo, right? You really have to figure out what makes the most sense for your teams and for your individuals. It can't be just one thing fits all.
Almost even what's the right thing for the objective of the call.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you think about even like when you SDR to AE is really easy to envision, because SDR is trying to book a meeting, AE is trying to move a deal forward. But that's I would wager, if you really looked at the analytics of this, that pacing varies in effectiveness based on whether it's a discovery call or a demo.
Exactly.
Right? Because they're two very different things. There's a different objective coming out of that. right? And that's a really important point is measuring that is extremely valuable because you can coach people appropriately.
Yeah. And I think you can also look at the level of seniority within the company as to how much time you even may have with them. If it's a super high SVP at a company, you're not going to have much time. So you're probably going to need to get your elevator pitch in pretty quick versus like if you're talking to a marketing operations manager, you might have a little more time.
It's fair. Yeah, it's a fair call. The inverse, who's ever receiving the call. Anything else you guys want to add? Jonathan, Brandon, this is where you do the like maybe one more thing.
One more thing.
I love when you always start it with maybe because it's not like there's like a 50-50 chance there's going to be one more thing.
Yeah,
there's
there's
100% chance there's going to be another thing. Like I would love it someday if you just said maybe one more thing. Nope.
No. Yeah.
No. There's not one more. All right. That's it for today. This was awesome. Thank you guys for going through this with me. Everybody listening, give us 5 stars. Shoot us your questions for this week on LinkedIn. Follow Brandon and myself on LinkedIn. Jonathan hasn't posted in 3 weeks. Don't follow him. Anyways, but give us 5 stars. Write us a review. Shoot us your questions for this week on LinkedIn. And anybody who wants to be a guest who's listening, we're going into guest series. If you got a great case study of some awesome RevOps stuff you did, we'd love to have you on and we can talk about that. So shoot me an email, shoot me a message, and we will get that sorted out. Thanks, guys.
All right. Until next week.
See you next week.
Yep.
See you guys.